Okay, thank you. And so what would the key thing for me is this idea of listening and that nobody knows everything, and the idea of letting people just express because you just never know, and giving them permission to be the best they can be, because that's also a mentoring and coaching activity. Okay, so thank you. Afalasha, do you want to share with us?
Okay. Yes. So I did have someone who held my hand. He was my HOD then.
Okay.
And it was very, very touching because it was very firm. So he wouldn't take any, he wouldn't suffer any fools gladly. But at the same time, he was, I don't think he even knew that he had empathy. That he could be empathetic, but it did come across, he was very accommodating. He would speak up for me. He would take time to. I remember then that he even used to give me tutorials. He'd give me books and say, okay, oh, just read this, read that. You can catch up. I know you can do it. Even I felt like, no, I can't. Say, no, I know you have it in you. You have it in you. And that was very encouraging because it was a very, very difficult time for me. Even though I didn't stay long at the place, we remained friends. I mean, this is like how many years? Over 10 years ago now. We remained friends. And even now, he still sort of, well, I won't say mentor me, but, I'm still able to go back to him and say, okay, look, I want to do this. What do you think? And he said, oh, look, so he's a great cheerleader. So I'm grateful that at that time, in that space, I had someone who could stand up for me in a very difficult environment and he wasn't just like a colleague or a friend, he was actually someone that was I was reporting to directly, but I think he was able to see that, look, this girl needed a break, and he was there. And so, of course, living there, I went on my own. So I run my own, my own firm. And of course, I've had many people, pass through me. And I think that maybe as tough as my boss was, they were not tough as farmers. So I assumed that I ended to be as firm as, because that was the road he showed me, and I was grateful. So I also felt that was the same road that I will show those that were coming into my space. But I think that this generational thing was a problem because it then seemed like those that were coming through me weren't ready. They weren't ready because so of course this my head of department is just a year or two, ahead of me, even in age and your call. But and so maybe that was where I could take the correction. Maybe because it wasn't so much, older, and I knew that he understood. Maybe I understood that he understood, right? I knew that we were on the same page. Yes. So when I realized with the younger ones, where it was almost like, look, this one that she's saying is too heavy. Yes. We don't need to get that deep. When the going gets tough, let's just, take a hike, right? There's no point in having to walk through. But there's like a few of them that, we still keep in touch because, so there's still opportunity to continue to mentor and to still guide. Yes. But I often found that not very many were willing to take the guidance. And I believe that it was because it's just a different generation. And yes. the understanding is just a lot different from, doing my own time.
Okay, thank you. Now, what you've talked about is something that a lot of people don't really talk about, which is sponsorship. We talk a lot about mentoring and coaching, but sponsorship is about actually taking somebody in hand and walking them through in their career. And I think that's something that all of us who are maybe at higher levels than others should learn to do, that mentoring and coaching may not be enough. Maybe we should walk them through their career. So Teniola, what has your experience been? And then if I may just remind the participants, the attendees, to put their questions in the Q&A. In the Q&A box. I think they'll be putting them in the chat box. That's also fine anyway. But please send your questions because we're going to start taking questions soon. Thank you. Tanyala.
Thank you. My experience, particularly with people that have impacted me, has been really positive. And I had these two supervisors who, they were great because, first of all, they just really cared about the work that they were doing. And I think that's so important, and something that we talk about it sometimes, but we don't really focus on it a whole lot, which is that when first and foremost you care most about the work that you're actually doing, and in your mind, the goal is just to get the job done. And it's not really about, well, actually it has to be this particular way, or it has to be my way or no way or anything like that. I think with those two supervisors, they were just so passionate about the work we were doing. And they really, because they were so passionate about the work we were doing, they really valued the different perspectives which myself and my colleagues brought to the table when we were doing everything that we were being tasked with doing. And so in that way, we became really good friends. We became really good confidants as well, actually. When they were having a particular challenge, they'll say, "Oh, Tenny, this is the challenge we're having. How do you think we should go about it?" Or, if I was having a particular challenge, I, had no qualms being able to go to them and say, "Actually, I don't quite know how to navigate this." And so much so that, in fact, I've been in the job I'm currently in for about 2 years. And since I started, these two particular supervisors till today, when they are starting work on a project or anything like that, they still sometimes send me an email and say, "Hey, Tani, like, would you be available to help me with this project that I'm working on?" So that is what my experience has been in that regard, and it's been really positive. In terms of those who have impacted, I mean, I would hope at least the children I've interacted with, but also not just the children, but also their teachers. In the sense that, so for context, the work I do, I interact a lot with schools, particularly schools that were built for low-income neighborhoods, or just generally for children from underrepresented backgrounds in education. And as a result, a lot of my job revolves around just interacting with these people, and genuinely the broad goal is making them believe that higher education is something they can attain. But apart from the making them believe that higher education is something they can attain, I think on the flip side, which feeds quite well into the conversation we're having intergeneration wise, because something we don't always talk about is also how young people can help older people as well feel that they are still doing something that is worthwhile, and they are still doing something that is valuable. I find that a lot of the teachers sometimes who I interact with during my work are sometimes people who are in a school where, for example, budgets may not be as abundant in terms of the particular programs they are running. And sometimes, you can kind of tell when life is weighing down a lot on someone, and when to them they're starting to think, well, actually, I'm kind of just going through the motions now. I'm not entirely sure if what I'm doing adds value. And so the impact I hope I have is that when I interact with these kids and I interact with their teachers, I make them believe that there is still something they're doing that is valuable. They are still adding value to the world, and that for the kids, higher education is attainable. If they want it, they can get it. And that for the teachers, there is an end goal in terms of there is something valuable they're adding by putting giving an education to these children, and ensuring that they can make something of themselves.
Thank you. So what I hear, the critical thing, which I've heard across the three of you, your responses, is the idea of leveling the vertical structure, the vertical relationship. So it's like saying you're human, I'm human, and that's what matters. So it's more about the human experience. It's more about relating with each other and establishing those connections, not so much that you're this age, I'm that age. And I think that's a really critical thing. And I think it's a good point, actually, to ask the last question of all of you. And this last question, interestingly, is echoed by some of the questions which have come through. So my last question is, how can we intentionally bridge intergenerational gaps, especially given our sociocultural circumstances, and how can we set the necessary boundaries to make it work? And so the questions that relate to it is one that says, how can we bridge the gap between traditional values and modern perspectives at home? Do you think upbringing at home has a huge influence on how someone communicates? And the second one is, how can we improve active listening skills across generations? What are some common misunderstandings between different generations, and how can we address them? And yet the third one, which speaks to the same thing, how can we find common ground and shared interests between different generations? So I think we've all been inspired, since that's the last question, and that's also a question that three attendees have asked. So can I ask each of you to address that question? It doesn't matter to me in which order. It's maybe just for the sake of order. that I will that Teniola, you start this one. And then after you, we'll have Afolashade, and then Ayobami will close that out, and we'll see what are the questions we have. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the first thing I will say is that I think upbringing and communication are definitely very strongly linked. Just in the sense that I think if someone hasn't been taught how to communicate, they're often going to then have to learn. And whether that learning happens at home or outside of the home is completely up to circumstance, or rather how intentionally that was taught. But essentially, if they didn't learn at home, they're going to learn outside, or they're going to have to learn by themselves. And so I think the answer to that question would definitely be yes. But I think the key thing to kind of recognize is that it's not just a learning experience one way. It's not just the young person learning how they want to communicate to the older person, but it's also the other way around, because it's like we've kind of said before, it's a new circumstance for both sides. I'll say for example, my personal experience with my parents, we've both kind of had to we've almost had to adjust. Just generally speaking, we've had to, as we're both growing, as we're all growing, rather, I shouldn't say as we're both, as myself, my mom, my dad, as we're all growing, we have had to adjust, just generally speaking, according to, okay, actually, this is how this person works, this is how this person functions, this is how this person would hear things, this is how I could get through to this person, generally speaking. And I think why that is important is because so with the point of listening, right? What we don't realize as human beings, which is generally quite important, is we don't realize that we already have our own subconscious biases. And when we
Absolutely.
already have our subconscious biases, we tend to hear things which have not actually been said. And this is this is
Absolutely.
not which is just the fault of, it's not just going to be the fault of the older person or the younger person. It's going to be the fault on all sides. You're going to hear things which haven't been said. And that means that communication is made more difficult. So you have to teach yourself to undo that. And so I think that is quite important in being able to actually communicate without barriers.
Thank you. So, Afolashade.
Okay, so I think that I'm going to talk about in terms of how the background would affect the social skills, and also then talk about setting boundaries. So what I think is whether between parents and their children, or between siblings, or between colleagues, I think that the first thing to bear in mind is that we're all human beings.
Yes.
We all come from different places.
Yes.
We all have things that, God put in us. We have abilities, we have weaknesses, we have strengths.
Yes.
And the fact that you're stronger than me in one area doesn't make me a failure. It just makes me different. So I think that once you can put respect at the forefront, then it helps. Always put yourself in the other person's shoes. So I try to, as a parent, your child is always your child, right? But I realize my 17-year-old is taller than me. He's a man. When I see him, I see the muscles and I'm like, oh my gosh, you need to respect this boy. So now I'm so conscious, and I don't want to lose my child, because you hear stories about when children that keep secrets from there, just think that all is well and good, and then one day you hear that something's going out of somewhere. So I when I'm having conversations now, I have them in low tones. I don't want to scream. I have conversations, just let's have, I want to build a relationship. I want to really know him, because I know that he's at the age where once he's off to university, and I'm just looking at Tenny and thinking, this Tenny that I knew like just 3-4 years ago, he doesn't even look like a Tenny anymore. It looks so different, honestly. And I'm like, once you lose them, so I want to be in on the relationship. So I'm being very careful about building. I'm being intentional. I think that's the point. I'm being intentional about nurturing this relationship, because I want it to last and stand the test of time. And I think that, if you have that at the back of your mind, whether a colleague at work, siblings, anyone, be intentional. And I think also setting boundaries. You don't have to always say yes to everything. You don't have to always say yes to everything. You have to be able to put yourself first. Is this something I can do? And if I can't do it right now, can I do it later? And in a very respectful manner, also communicate to whoever needs your help that, look,